Hi everyone, my name is Brandon Wheeler, and I'm doing a response to the four articles about literature and diversity. So basically, what I took away from these articles after reading them was obviously that there's a severe lack of literature with diverse characters in terms of culture, and mainly disability was the one I was most surprised about. And when I say surprised, I guess it was something I'd never really considered. So seeing it in print was kind of surprising. Um, what I really feel I want to talk about is more what I'm going to take away from it, not so much what the article talked about. Especially the first one was a lot of just factual information, which is obviously interesting. But the third article was the one that I really felt was the most interesting. That talked about how even though like there are more um, children's books being written about diverse cultural characters and that sort of thing, those with disabilities are still lacking severely. So, um, I guess I'm not sure what what to talk about other than what to maybe do about it as a future teacher. I guess even though I'm going to be a secondary ed teacher, this is still something that I've noticed in secondary ed textbooks and that sort of thing, especially in what I'm going into, which is history. History textbooks seem to be all about Anglo-Saxon history for the most part, especially American textbooks, obviously. And there's really not a diversity of other information in terms of African Americans, Hispanics, that sort of thing. Even in my own experience in my own high school, it was more about um, just white person's history in general. I guess I don't really know how else to put it. We would stop and talk about African Americans here and there. Basically, now looking back, probably just to fulfill a requirement of sorts, but really never delve too deeply into it. But going back to children's literature, what I found the most interesting was the disability issue. Like there was a section that talked about how the reason disability is so far behind like multicultural diversity in terms of literature is that they're just cultural literature has they all have something in common. Sorry, they all have something in common in terms of like food, music, language, something like that. But disability doesn't. Like disabilities don't because they're all so different and wide ranging. And my concern is how do you change that as a teacher? How do you go about correcting that or at least adapting to it so that it isn't that way in your classroom? And I really have no idea, to be completely honest, and that kind of makes me feel bad about myself in a way a little bit, and I wish I had a better answer, but I really don't. I guess the only thing I can think of would be to go sort through the books, um, much like the Blaska article talked about. Obviously she came up, or he she sorry, they came up with a system and a checklist of you know criteria that they based all these literary works on, and how diverse they were, and basically whether they were worth using or not. So I think that is just an extra step that teachers need to take in terms of what literature they're going to use, especially if it's not literature that's mandated by your school's curriculum. I think you need to really do some homework and go the extra mile and try to sort through books, especially like the first article talked about with such a diverse student population that's been projected over the next several years. We can't just sit back and rest on our you know previous previous works like that teachers have already done. Again, in my own experience, I think back about Caldecott books and Newbery Award winning books that the teachers just raved about and how great they were, and they weren't diverse in the slightest. Looking back, I can't even think of a book I read about that um, portrayed an African American or another minority group in a positive light, or even as a main character for that matter. And I definitely can't even think of a book that portrayed a person with a disability in any type of light that was really relevant to a student, or a student that had a disability would want to read. Um, so I guess here again, to reiterate, I'm really not talking about the articles themselves. I guess I'm looking at more how I'm going to take this information and translate it into my own career and that sort of thing. So, um, yeah, I guess closing thoughts would be just to take that in and keep that in mind as a future teacher, to to make sure that you are really paying attention to your students, and again, not to just tailor to your student body. I mean, if you have, you know, a classroom of 30 kids that are all white, Protestant, middle class students, like that is, there's no reason just to, like, that's not a time to just sit back and tailor books to them that only apply to them. Students still need to be exposed to diversity because the country as a whole is changing that way. And another thing that I had thought about was the authors. Where is the author accountability in all of this? They're only writing about certain types of characters, and where does that come from? Why is that? Is it because it's easier to write about those types of people, or is it strictly because they haven't been exposed to it enough themselves, or they're not taking a risk, for lack of a better term, of branching out? And I think there again, that starts with their education and their own background and what their teachers taught them. Um, Kind of a chicken or the egg issue, I guess. So here again, it's kind of a teacher's responsibility to make sure that students are always being exposed to more diverse pieces of literature, you know, just in case, for one example, that they do become an author one day and that they will hopefully write about um, more diverse populations. So, thanks for watching.